Quantum Ogre is a funny term for, I think, something that conceptually GMs do all the time anyway, and that is take a piece of content that we've designed, we've created, we've worked on, and assuming that the party doesn't encounter it, instead of throwing it away, use it later. Sounds simple, right? Well, it is. It is simple. That's in its, maybe its purest form. And in this very simple sense, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's something we do all the time, right? You create a layer, for example, maybe you map it out, maybe you give it some cool environmental effects. Party never goes to the layer. Do you throw away that whole layer encounter? No, you could put it in your bag of tricks. Next time the party's in a similar location and they decide to go in, boom, use the layer encounter you've already created. Where's the problem? Well, there isn't a problem. But, and as usual with such things, there's always a but. I think that the Quantum Ogre concept as a tool really embraces some habits, or maybe I should say reinforces or encourages habits that I don't think are helpful in the long run. First part. Now keep in mind where I'm coming from, my bias is I'm more of an old school D&D player, old school RPG player, OSR, NSR, very rules light, prep light type of role playing. For me, encounters are not prep. It doesn't take much to throw up an encounter in an OSR sense. Get a place, throw a creature in there, think about its motivations, maybe think about a potential twist. What does it want? And go. Very easy. So I don't look at encounters as things that we need to really save. Okay, I have an ogre. All right, party didn't meet the ogre. Fair enough. I don't need to save that ogre. I can throw it back in the bag, sure, but it's not something I need to preserve. I don't think that my encounters are so awesome in a particular sense that I need to make sure that the players find it. Well, they got to find this ogre. They got to do it. It's too good. No, nothing's too good. If they find it, fine. If they don't find it, I got a million other encounters they could potentially find. So that's maybe bad habit number one, is looking at your encounters as being these precious things. I have to save it. They have to encounter it. It's so good. Because that way, that's where you start getting into the more railroady kind of things, that forcing the players in a certain direction, pushing them the way that you want to go so that they will find this thing that you have decided they must find. The second thing to get to, and that is that the concept of the Quantum Ogre is, hey, you have an encounter for, as the example, an ogre. Party doesn't encounter that ogre. Great, we're going to save that encounter for later. And like I said, this is all good, but there's a problem, which is just putting it in your bag of tricks for use in a week or next week doesn't actually solve the problem that you have. And that problem is now you're at a content deficit. You had this encounter planned, now you don't have a plan. So there's a tendency to, instead of saying, hey, I'll use it next week down the road, it's, I'm going to use it now regardless. And that's where you get to the classic Quantum Ogre example of party comes to two doors. You have earmarked, if they take the left-hand door, ogre. If they take the right-hand door, no ogre. But because it's a Quantum Ogre, now you can say, well, there are two doors. Maybe they take the left-hand door, the ogre's right there. They take the right-hand door, the ogre is a couple of rooms down. They're going to get that ogre regardless. Maybe the situation around the ogre is slightly different between left door, right door. However you slice it, they're getting the ogre. Now, I believe it was Courtney Campbell who originally came up with the conceit of the Quantum Ogre. And what he would say is that if the party goes up and they do their due diligence around the left-hand door and they hear ogre sounds, and they smell ogre smells, and they find ogre scat, or they hear something talking ogre, and the ogre's locked in place. It's no longer quantum, because the concept of the Quantum Ogre goes back to something like Schrodinger's cat, right? You don't know what's in the box till you open the box. And by the party examining the door, they're essentially opening the box. And so once you've set, okay, ogre's there, then you should not, as a GM, pick up the ogre and move it. Because now the ogre is no longer in this quantum state where you don't know where it is. You know exactly where it is. It's behind the left-hand door. But I think just like, regardless of how he envisioned the Quantum Ogre in that pure sense, it gets talked about in different ways, is because that's all well and good, but going back to the content deficit, I designed this, I need it, well, what am I going to do? I could still have the ogre behind both doors. Yeah, sure, there's an ogre in that room, but you know what, that ogre, there's another ogre. The ogre's twin brother is in that other room. So they're going to get that ogre, whether they want it or not, right? Easy peasy. The party, the players never know. But of course, whether they know or not is maybe besides the point. We're playing a game, and in this game, the choices you make as a player should matter. You did the examination, you did the legwork, you did everything you were supposed to do. And the reward for that is getting a heads up about what's in the room beyond. Now you make a smart decision, or at least a decision that you feel like is intelligent, using all the context of, hey, there's an ogre in there. We don't want to face the ogre. We're making that decision as players, as characters. We don't want anything to do with that ogre. So then by just jumping the ogre to the other room, you've invalidated all their decisions, whether they know it or not. And I have a feeling that, look, at a lot of these things, as players, you kind of get the gist of it eventually. It does catch up to you. If you use this too much and the party is continually running into these set piece encounters that seem a little too neat, seems like they can't avoid it, you get that sense as a player that, like, hey, we're trying all we can to avoid this stuff because we have goals that don't involve tangling with ogres, and yet the ogres keep showing up. It's not an art that is necessarily invisible, even though you may think, oh, they'll never know. You do it enough, they'll know. And the other consequence of this is that, well, you say, okay, well, they're just not going to find traces of ogres at either door. That way I haven't disturbed the quantum state. That way they can't say to me that I've invalidated their decisions, that I have undone the thought and effort they've gone in. And you may think, well, ain't I a smarty? Sure, but then you run into the other case, which is their choices don't matter. Who cares? Left door, right door, what difference does it make? The ogre's behind either door. Might as well not have a choice at all. Just have a single door. Heck, get rid of the door and just put the ogre smack dab in front of the party. If we're going to give the party choices, they should be meaningful choices. And if we remove all this stuff to make room for this quantum ogre, so to speak, then we risk removing their choices altogether. They don't have any meaningful choices because we're just going to build them down the railroad to the places that we want to get to. I believe it was Seth Skorkowski or someone else just put out a video about quantum ogres, and I think the conclusion of that video was that quantum ogre is a tool, and it absolutely is a tool. And I think if you go back to the most basic sense of it, which is if you have content that you have not revealed at the table, feel free to use it somewhere else. I absolutely think it is a valuable tool. And it makes sense to me. I've said this many times about my own philosophies of dungeon mastering. If it didn't come out at the table, it's all potential. You know, if they were going to go into a cave and in that cave was an ogre, but they didn't know there was an ogre in the cave, nobody told them there was an ogre in the cave, they never saw anything, and they were miles away from that cave, they see it in the distance, and I thought, oh, for sure this is where they're going to go, and they decide to go the other way, then yes, I have this ogre encounter. If I feel like I really got to use it the way it is and I can't possibly do something different or better later, then sure, I could take that note card with the ogre encounter and slot it back in my deck of cards, and I could shuffle it up and deal it out another time. However, where it's more commonly used is in this concept of taking a piece of content and pushing it to wherever on the board your party happens to be. And while that's tempting, it's fraught. And it's a little bit dangerous, and it removes some of the things that make the game really fun. And if you think, well, this is just internet talk, this doesn't really come out anywhere. I read a book, I believe it was How to Write Adventures That Don't Suck, but I might have the title wrong, where they essentially advocated this approach. And one of the first adventures that pops up in the book. In that case, it was 2 paths through a wood. So they weren't hex crawling the woods. The woods were essentially like a dungeon. And you had 2 paths you could go, 2 trails, I think. And on one trail, you'd encounter wolves. And then there's literally a note, if you take the other trail, that, oh, hey, if you didn't encounter the woods on the other trail, then the wolves. If you didn't encounter the wolves on the other trail, then, hey, the wolves will show up after the bridge. And I thought to myself, what's the purpose of that? This was a book, an OSR type book, I believe, at least for OSR gaming. These encounters are very simple. This was not some kind of massive set piece with a lot of moving parts. It's literally a little stat block of some wolves that show up in a clearing or somewhere. This is not a precious encounter. This is not something that I couldn't come up on my own, or as an author of an adventure that presumably you would feel good to publish, I couldn't spend a paragraph having something else. Hey, the wolves are on the other, on that trail. On this trail, there's a bear. A little bitty stat block. That's it. What was the purpose of quantum ogring those wolves? Quantum wolving. To me, it just comes up as lazy. I couldn't spend the effort as an author just to come up with another thing. Or why not just not have the wolves? Reward the party for taking that other path. Hey, they made a choice, and now there are no wolves in that path. That's great. Or is it? I don't know. That adventure authors seem to think, no, you have to face those wolves. And if you're in that boat where you're thinking about your players, think of, they have to face this thing, they have to experience this content that I've made, ask yourself why. What do they lose? What do you gain? Is it merely the fact that you're in a you're afraid of entering a content deficit, maybe then you should look at some other things. Maybe you should look at, hey, I can't prep this stuff. I get it from a 5th edition standpoint where often encounters are very complicated and have a lot of moving parts, not just mechanically in the system, but if you're using VTTs, battle maps, and minis, and grids, and all this stuff. I get it. And that makes the temptation to use Quantum Ogre in what I believe are ultimately harmful ways all the more prevalent, because I don't want to redo this work. Or maybe I'm in the middle of a game. I can't redo this work. But that to me is an invitation to look at and say, what can I do differently so that I don't end up in a content deficit? What can I do differently so that I have more things at the ready? Is it how I'm prepping? Is it how I'm running encounters? For me, playing the kind of old school rules light way, generating an encounter is super easy. I don't need to save them. I don't need to look at them as precious pieces. So maybe that's a direction to go in. And if after all this said and done, you think, you know what, I still need to use it, or I still want to use it, or I still think it is a good tool, then all I would say is use it in moderation, like all tools. Because whether your players end up ever telling you or not, if you use it too much, they will catch on, and it's not fun. The kinds of techniques like the Quantum Ogre are not the kind of things that as players you want to hear. So make sure they never find out. Best way to do that is either, well, not use it at all, but if you're hell-bent on using it, then using it very carefully. Game on. Talk to you later.